Tina Herman and her entire family went missing without a trace on November 10th, 2010.
She had 2 children, a 13-year-old girl, Sarah, and an 11-year-old boy, Cody.
The cops examined the house and discovered that the victims had been viciously assaulted.
There was bleeding from the front door, through the hallways, back into the rooms, and into the bathroom.
The offender poured motor oil over most of the red marks throughout the house, contaminating the evidence and revealing a solitary footprint in the hallway.
They were able to find that that was a 7.5 air wall. It was most likely the 13-year-old girl who had walked out of there, and we hoped that she was still alive.
Next, cops interrogated Tina's ex-husband, a man with a violent past who appeared to be genuinely concerned about his children's disappearance.
I had a set call thinking, I just got this weird, creepy feeling that, something is wrong with me.
Investigators discovered a receipt that directed them to the local Walmart parking lot.
The security person actually said that he thought the vehicle he was driving was a Toyota Yaris. So I thought, well, how many Toyota Yarises could there be in Knox County?
Following the clues trail, they discovered a second residence related to the case, but nothing prepared them for what they found inside.
The whole house was full of leaves, in bags, but there were just huge piles of leaves all through the house. And then they noticed that there was a dresser pushed against the basement door, and it was only on removing that dresser and going down into the basement that they discovered Sarah.
And I could hear Joe yelling, "They found her, she's alive, she's alive."
The small community of Howard, Ohio. 13-year-old Sarah Maynard was coming home with her little brother Cody as she entered the house. She expected her dog or her mother to greet her, but instead was met with silence. She began removing her shoes and noticed something sticky under her sole. She saw a clot of blood. As she turned it over, she took a step back from Cody and witnessed an unsettling scene. As she turned her attention back to her little brother, she noticed his wide-open eyes weren't focused on her. But Tina's manager at the local Dairy Queen grew concerned when she didn't show up for work. She tried calling Tina's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. As the hours passed, she eventually tried to call Tina's emergency contact number, Stephanie Spring, but again received no answer. Finally, as the sun began to set, Valerie got in her car and drove to Tina's house to check on her. When she arrived, she noticed that her Jeep wasn't in the driveway.
Sheriff Barber's office.
Yes, this is Valerie Haythorne. One of my employees did not show up for work this afternoon, which is totally uncharacteristic of her. I'm out of her house now. I just went in her home because I'm so worried about her. There is blood everywhere.
Don't go back in the house.
We begin tonight with a developing story, a mystery that grows stranger by the minute. An entire family just vanishes.
As the search intensifies, so does the fear in this community.
I think everyone's just kind of really scared that something like this could happen so close to home.
Combing through the entire residence proved to be challenging. There was forensic evidence in literally every room, and analysis had to be performed in each of them. Drag marks from each of the rooms, converged into the bathroom motor oil, had also been poured all over the place. Detectives assumed this was done in an attempt to eventually set the scene on fire or contaminate the evidence. On top of that, many footwear impressions were found on the floor. One was so accurate that they were able to not only identify the size, but also the brand. Right beside the door, heading outside, was an imprint of a small women-sized airwalk. Probably some LED agent Winter Rich assumed Sarah had been kidnapped by the perpetrator of the crime.
We made our conclusion that it was most likely the 13-year-old girl who had walked out of there, and we hoped that she was still alive.
Even though the case was unusual, the clock was still ticking for Sarah, so the Knox County Police divided their forces into 3 groups. The first group would stay with the department, gathering as many relatives and friends of the victims as possible and conducting back-to-back interviews. Policemen, canine squads, and volunteers would search the fields, forests, and mountains throughout the area.
Friends and neighbors scouring a wooded area looking for any sign of a missing family.
The last group, the detectives kept researching the house and uncovered 4 distinct blood samples. Everything fit the family profiles except for one, which was eventually identified as Stephanie Springs. Tina's closest friend returned to the station, and the cops examined Larry, the child's estranged father. He had previously been accused of domestic abuse, so he was high on their list.
I just got this weird, creepy feeling that, something is wrong with the kid. And I haven't slept all freaking night. I haven't moved best, I haven't said anything.
But the authorities were unable to establish any actual intentions on his part. Instead, they learnt more about Tina's recent separation, which led them to another lead.
Tina Herman was in a relationship with a man by the name of Greg Borders, a live-in boyfriend that they had been living together in this house for some period of time.
Greg was the final person to arrive at the location following the occurrence, as well as the last to show up for his interview. He stated that he and Tina had a large disagreement the same day she went missing, so the police chose to keep him close while they checked his alibi.
Can you tell me a little bit about Tina?
Yeah, I know we had problems, but I still love her.
Well, why was Tina looking for an apartment?
She was mad. She knew I was going to stay with my friend that night, and she thought maybe I was going to see a girl and do something.
What day was it?
Wednesday morning. And it didn't sound good with everything that's going on.
You know what? You gotta understand. I never worry, and I would be worried too.
With little else to go on, they turned to Stephanie's acquaintances and Tina's co-workers, to no effect.
Well, she didn't show up for work Wednesday, and nobody could get a hold of her. Her phone was off, and we were like, okay, what's going on?
I talked to her Tuesday night, and I talked to her Wednesday.
After a whole day dedicated to interviews, the officers found next to nothing. But on the other end of the town, the detectives inside the house were on the verge of making a discovery that would change everything. They still hadn't looked at the garage, the only unsoiled area on the property inside, and they discovered a Walmart plastic bag laying against the wall. They unpacked 2 tarps, some heavy-duty garbage bags, and a receipt, so the detectives headed to the neighboring town. Gagged and tied up, Sarah was let out of her mother's Jeep in the middle of the night. She looked around for a second to figure out where she was, but her abductor immediately put a pillowcase over her head before pushing her into the trunk of another car. Inside, she tried to piece together what had just happened to her, and more specifically, what had happened to her family. Her thoughts were interrupted when the trunk opened.
He then drove me to another house. He unblindfolded me, and then he put me in the basement.
Inside, Sarah noticed an unusual odor from under the pillowcase, almost as if she were in the middle of a forest or standing over a freshly mowed lawn. But the underlying smell of decay crept in after a while. Before she could identify where it came from, she was thrown onto a strangely textured mattress, but everything came together when the kidnapper finally removed the pillowcase covering her eyes.
I saw leaves everywhere. The leaves were all over the walls. He had told me he wanted to put leaves to make my bed comfortable.
3 days had passed since the kidnapping, and the dangerous condition had worsened. Her captor forced her to wear rubbish bags as clothing before dumping her in a damp fissure behind a wall. Under the stairs, he told her to be appreciative for how he treated her.
He felt good about himself, for him to think that he fed me and stuff, and he didn't. He didn't let me shower or do any of that stuff. I didn't eat anything for 4 days. Didn't sleep. I stayed awake worrying about where my family.
Furthermore, she had to contend with her captor's never-ending fall into lunacy.
I think I just listened to everything he told me to do, and just thinking about what had happened to them and just staying strong.
Back at the store, the CCTV footage contradicted the detectives' first judgments, depicting what appeared to be a complete stranger rather than someone from Tina's or Stephanie's lives.
The security person actually said that he thought the vehicle he was driving was a Toyota Yaris. So I thought, well, how many Toyota Yarises could there be in Knox County? And on the first page, the last one on the page was Matthew Hoffman.
The cops uncovered an important discovery when they investigated the suspect's driver's license. Matthew Hoffman's mother's residence was reported as Apple Valley Drive, which was a short walk from Sarah's house. However, he had relocated to the nearby town of Mount Vermont since then, and they now had a lead that could connect him to Sarah's family.
He looked very much like the subject in the video and was actually wearing the same shirt in his driver's license photo that he was wearing at the store.
Armed with the information they gathered, the cops secured a warrant and stormed Matthew Hoffman's home early in the morning. When they entered, they discovered him sleeping on the couch, surrounded by leaves.
I mean, the whole house was full of leaves. He'd collected a large amount of leaves, had them tacked to his walls, in bags, but there were just huge piles of leaves all through the house.
While he was being held, they began searching the ground level for any clues to the missing family.
They started doing a room-by-room search.
The house's layout was bewildering, with walls of leaves and an odd odor dominating the atmosphere.
And they didn't find anything else on the ground floor. They didn't find anything else on the second floor.
That was until they uncovered a dresser that was weirdly situated among the walls of leaves. They moved it aside to reveal a concealed entrance leading to the basement, where they found indications of Sarah's captivity, like as ropes and duct tape around an improvised bed, but no sign of her as they were leaving. One officer noticed a crevice in the wall near the stairs and discovered Sarah sitting motionless and quiet. They carefully helped Sarah out of the crevice. Her legs trembled uncontrollably as they walked up the stairs, and her eyes remained fixed on the floor, avoiding any eye contact with the policeman.
The day I was rescued, I clearly remember I was down in the basement and I heard these guys come down the steps and they said, "We're not down here to hurt you." And then they picked me up and put me in the ambulance.
When Sarah arrived at the hospital, she was rushed to the emergency room, where a team of doctors and nurses stabilized her. Her father rushed to her side, but when he saw her, he was taken aback by her appearance. Her face was sunken and gaunt, and she appeared to have aged 10 years. Her ability to speak had also been hampered by the trauma, causing her to whisper and stutter. But Sarah was able to tell the officer what happened during her captivity.
Sarah did confirm in her interview after she was rescued that he had sexually assaulted her.
But the most difficult part was still to come. When the detective asked Sarah to retell what transpired inside her own home 4 days previously, her eyes remained focused on the floor.
I can't think about how they died. It is too much because that's not a way a human being should die.
She screamed at Cody to run and escape, while racing farther into the house to phone the police once in her room. Sarah's mind was filled with panic as she heard horrifying screams emanating from the hallway.
I got to the phone and dialed 911, but I didn't hit talk because he'd kill me. He got out his knife and cut me on my finger. There was already blood on the knife that he had in his hand. That is the moment when I began to think he killed my mom.
He led her into the kitchen and tied her up. From that point forward, she listened closely for any sounds that would provide clues about her family's whereabouts. Eventually, she understood something had happened to Cody.
Time I knew he was killing my brother in the bathroom because I heard the toilet flush and then I heard running water.
He then returned and carried Sarah to the garage, forcing her to sit on top of a pile of plastic bags in the back of her mother's vehicle.
Later I found out that he had laid me on their dead bodies in the car.
Now convinced that the missing family had actually been murdered, the police interviewed Hoffman over several days. He eventually confessed, in exchange for a diminishing plea deal. True to his twisted nature, the truth was difficult to bear. He murdered Stephanie Tina Cody and their dog, then took care of their bodies in the bathroom with a pocket knife. 2 days later, he stuffed the garbage bags with the remains inside a hollow tree in the middle of the woods.
I have no regrets about this case whatsoever. I mean, life in prison without parole, there was a part of me that just felt like, Matthew Hoffman, you're no longer in control.
Sarah wanted to find peace in her father's care after the tragedy, but returning home was far from comfort.
The sole survivor of the 2010 Knox County killing says she's been the victim of abuse after her rescue.
Sarah's stepmother, Larry, was frequently abusive against her, so she found herself locked once more, this time in a different type of prison, but she refused to be tortured again, so she vowed to stop the cycle of violence and agony once and for all.
She said she simply cannot take it anymore. That is why she said something. Both were served with protection papers and ordered no contact with Sarah.
Despite the difficulties of her ordeal, Sarah never gave up as a teenager. She wrote a book about her case and co-founded a victim advocacy fund with her grandmother. She also adopted Elsa, one of the police canines involved in her hunt.
I have a dog named Elsa. She used to be on the canine team that was searching for my mom and my brother.
Sarah, a mother of two, hopes to study pediatrics with a grant from Dr. Phil and the University of Florida.
Because we are all inspired by your courage and your bravery, and we want to do everything we can to help this dream of yours come true.
Sarah chose to break her silence for Jamie Kloss, a fellow kidnapping survivor whose case closely resembled her own. After taking time away from the public to focus on raising her own family and carrying on her loved ones' memories.
If she is able to look up to me, I can help her in a very positive way.
Sarah, I think your case is the closest to Jamie's. What is your advice to Jamie?
Of course, we feel days, where we feel hopeless and we want to give up. Of course, I'm sure all of us feel that way, but we can't.
Despite her tough past, she perseveres and embraces her journey as a survivor.
It made me become a really strong woman. It made me become a really strong mother.
I'm just gonna hug you for a second. Are you okay with hugs?
If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another case. Let us know in the comments what you think of today's story, or suggest a case you'd like us to cover next. Stay safe, and remember, truth always finds a way to surface. Until next time.